Hi, everyone. We're going to get started, and we'll be recording this webinar, so if you want to share it with any of your colleagues who couldn't jump on, you can do that afterwards. And thank you all for joining this webinar on Credit for Prior Learning, or CPL. My name is Meredith Hills, and I work with Advance CTE. This webinar goes hand in hand with a report that Advance CTE released today through support from the Joyce Foundation on developing credit for prior learning policies to support post-secondary attainment for every learner. This report can be found on our website, careertech.org, in the Resource Center, and then you'll also see the full URL on the slide that's up right now. The webinar today will discuss some of the themes of the report, and I encourage you all to take a look at the report to learn more about why CPL has proven impactful, national trends and themes in CPL, best practices from Colorado, Kansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, Tennessee, and Virginia, and topics such as CPL for military service members, portability of credits, building in apprenticeships and industry-recognized credentials, and communicating about CPL opportunities. So I'm joined on the webinar today by Kathy Hughes, a consultant with Advance CTE who worked on this report, Todd Estes, Director of Career Education Programs and Workforce Partnerships at the Virginia Community College System, Susan Moyer, the Credit for Prior Learning Coordinator at the Virginia Community College System, and Dr. Renee Cintrone, Chief Academic Affairs Officer at the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. The three speakers today from Virginia and Louisiana share perspectives from the community college system level. And often this is where CPL policies are dictated, though not always, and we'll get into that more later on. During today's webinar, we'll discuss the potential that CPL policies have, what the policy landscape looks like in terms of state, system level, and institutional roles. We'll hear from leaders in Virginia and Louisiana. We'll share recommendations for how to support CPL at the state level, and then we'll be sure to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So you all are muted, so please be sure to type all questions into the chat box, and it'd be great if you could include your name and state as well. We'll share these questions with presenters during Q&A at the end. So we won't be pausing for questions throughout the webinar, but you can add anything to the chat box during the presentations, and we'll read them out loud at the end. So now we're going to talk about what exactly CPL is and why it matters so much. The definition that Advance CTE uses for CPL is from the American Council on Education, ACE, and it's academic credit granted for knowledge and skills gained outside the classroom. This definition is what's used by many states and organizations, so I'm sure it looks familiar to a lot of you. CPL academic equivalencies, so the college credits that are granted for prior experiences, are determined through prior learning assessments, or PLAs. Which PLAs are utilized vary across states and institutions, but the most common types fall into 4 categories. The first category is standardized exams. This is a nationally recognized assessment developed by a national organization, often with input from multiple outside parties. Some common examples of this are the College Level Examination Program, CLEP, and the CLEP assessment are 33 different exams across 5 subjects that award academic credits to almost 3,000 institutions. Another common example is the DSST Subject Standardized Test for Defense Activity for Non-Traditional Education Support. In the past, the DSST has been typically geared for members of the military, and this is still the case, though it's opening to a bit of a broader base. And finally, AP and IB exams are a common form of standardized exam. The second category is third-party evaluations. So these are recommendations for how to align experience to academic agencies and are proposed to academic credit and are proposed by outside agencies. So a common agency that provides guidance on this is ACE. The fourth category is individualized assessments. So these are assessments created at the institutional level, the most common one being a portfolio review. And finally, the fourth category is institution-led exams or assessments, and these are often referred to as challenge exams. CPL and PLA are often used interchangeably. It really depends on how a state or organization chooses to define each. So you may see a written policy on PLA that really fits into what we would consider CPL. So be aware of those definitions, and the two really do feed into each other most often. So now that I've explained a little about what CPL is, I'm going to turn to Kathy, who will talk about why this matters.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Meredith. I am going to spend just a few minutes talking about why we're seeing increased state and institution attention to CPL. You see, we all are aware of this critical need to improve college retention and completion rates, and higher ed leaders are really looking for ways to improve college completion. They want to get students to the finish line, get them there on time, if not sooner, and part of that is addressing college affordability. Adult learners are generally defined as those who are 25 years old and older when they first enter college. You might also see the terms non-traditional or post-traditional learners, and they do tend to have much lower completion rates than students who enter college right after graduating from high school. But as states and institutions are increasingly recognizing, these learners may come to college with experience and skills that align with the learning outcomes of college credit courses. So they're turning to CPL in part because there is some evidence that it's effective in both improving completion and reducing time to degree. Next slide, please. So let's take just a quick look at some of that evidence. CALE is the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, and CALE did a study in 2010. They aggregated data from 48 institutions. You see, they found that the adult learners who used CPL opportunities had higher graduation rates, shorter time to degree, and their graduation rates were significantly higher. So 56% of the adult learners with CPL credits graduated within 7 years, compared to 21% of adult learners who didn't make use of any credit for prior learning. They also did shorten the time they took to obtain a degree with the adult learners who earned some credits for prior learning. They shortened their time to graduation by 1 to 2 semesters. And as we would expect, as the number of those credits increased, the average time to degree decreased. Now that study is mostly descriptive. They did control for some other variables, but we can't be sure that earning credits for prior learning actually caused those students to be more successful from that study. But we do have this study of CLEP, and it is a causal study. As Meredith said, CLEP refers to those 33 assessments that are administered by the College Board. CLEP tests cost $85 to take a test, but it's free for military members. The Department of Defense pays for the test for members of the military. And I think, as Meredith also said, most post-secondary institutions do award credit for passing the CLEP exam. So this study found that achieving even one credit-granting CLEP score increased students' chances of graduating. And you see here, in some cases, really significantly. So again, for these adult students who are enrolled in community colleges, 19% greater probability of graduating. So that's really significant. And in this case, we do know that it is the CLEP score and those credits that brought about those increased graduation rates. Next slide, please. So we see those large effects from that study, and for those non-traditional students who are more likely to be enrolled in community colleges. We're going to hear in a little bit from our state presenters about these particular populations and their efforts in community colleges. I wanted to mention quickly, just today I saw information about this new study. It's being sponsored by CALE and WICHE together. It's in the planning phase. They are looking for 70 institutions to participate in this new study of credit for prior learning. There's the information. Contact this individual at CALE or see this web link for information about how to apply. And I would encourage you to do so that we can have more research on the effectiveness of credit for prior learning. Thank you, and now back to Meredith.
Thanks, Kathy. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the policy landscape of CPL. So CPL policies can be found at the state, post-secondary system, or institutional levels, and most often you'll see a combination of all three. Overall, control of CPL implementation tends to be greater at the local level than at the state level. Even if state policy or legislation dictates some form of acceptance for CPL, the state tends to more provide general guidance, whereas a post-secondary system or institution will determine the specific way that CPL is accepted as academic credits. So mandating that CPL policies must be established, but then directing the post-secondary system or individual college to determine that policy is pretty common among states. To get an idea of what this might look like, I'll talk about Minnesota's CPL policy structure, which is also profiled in our report that came out today. Minnesota statutes include 4 mandates on CPL. The first is that credit must be granted for military training and service. The second is that credit must be granted for AP and IB. Third, credit must be granted for CLEP assessments. And fourth, state colleges must create a process for turning world language certificates and seals into course credit. Next, the 15-member governor-appointed Board of Trustees for Minnesota state colleges and universities provides system-wide guidance for CPL. So institutions also look to internal college and university assessments and military courses and occupations, but the board really provides the system-wide guidance in terms of consistency across institutions. Then, at the institutional level, faculty ultimately have the final word in how CPL is implemented, and they can override state and board policy with the exception of military-related policies. So the board requires that all institutions create and publish a CPL standard of practice, and faculty determine how that standard is implemented. This structure of having various degrees of policy specifics compared to more of a guideline for CPL at the state level, post-secondary system, and institutional level is not unique to Minnesota, but it's also not the rule. Some states might have no state-level CPL rules and leave it entirely up to the institution. Others might do it differently. It really just depends on that state. Now I'm going to turn to Susan and Todd in Virginia to speak about some of the initiatives that they've taken around CPL. And you are both muted if either of you is trying to speak right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Oh.
Yes, I got both. Thank you.
Sorry for that, guys. Thanks, Susan. And this is Todd Estes, and I'll turn it over to Susan real quickly. But I do very much appreciate the fact that Meredith kind of mentioned that the speakers from Virginia and Louisiana will be emphasizing the community college systems, and it's certainly not to acknowledge that our university partners here in the Commonwealth of Virginia are not doing wonderful things, and that the state guidelines in the Code of Virginia also apply to them. But Susan and I will be specifically highlighting some items within our 23 community college system here in the Commonwealth. So, and with that, I'll turn it over to Susan, who's going to highlight and probably want to move to the next slide, the Credits to Careers program.
Sure. So thank you, Todd. And I'll try to keep it brief, but Todd, keep me on time because I can continue to talk. But in in 2015, Virginia state legislatures actually passed law that required the 23 community colleges to take a closer look at military credit for prior learning and implement policy as well as procedures and practices to award military credit. And so in about between 2015 and 2017, we launched a big effort, if you will, or initiative to bring faculty together to look at various different disciplines for military credit for prior learning. And they have worked hard and rigorous, and I compliment our faculty tremendously for all the hard work they have done for VCCS. And because of their hard work, we now have over about 60,000 line spreadsheet that has military courses equated over to a VCCS actual course. This is special not only in the amount of equivalencies that we have, but it's unique and special in that it's not just selective, but actual course-to-course matches, which is really going to accelerate the time and effort that a veteran or military service member will do when they enroll at the system office, because it's going to impact directly at their academic program. And from these efforts from our faculty, we were able to implement a Credits to Careers academic and career portal for our veterans. And if you'd like to see it, you can actually go to the website. It's www.creditstocareers.org and go on and take a look at the portal itself. But this portal actually is housing all of those equivalencies that our faculty has completed and reviewed and vetted at our 23 community colleges. And now it's the first of its kind, especially for a system where it's outer-facing, for students to come onto this platform and see what kind of college credits they can receive even prior to applying to the VCCS. It really gives them a lot of power and leverage in their career, and also it gives them the opportunity to speak for themselves on where, some of these service members don't even realize that they have all these college credits coming their way. And so some of them will enter school not knowing. And so this is such a powerful tool because it's holistic in that it's giving academic advisors the chance to properly advise our students prior to enrolling them in a course. It gives our transcript evaluators and registrars a turnaround time for evaluation that is unheard of. It used to take about 6 to 8 weeks, and it literally can take our registrars now days to complete an evaluation. And again, it's accelerating time for our and money savings for our military connected students who are coming to the platform to use it. It's launched in 2017, so we're about 18 months in. We have about 4,500 students already using the site. We have, I think it was over 160,000 visitors a day, or not a day, excuse me, in a month. That's crazy, in a day, I wish. But we're having a lot of folks come to the site and take a look at it, and we are trying to get the word out now more and more about the existence. Todd and I just yesterday visited with the National Guard here in the state of Virginia to really start launching and doing an active marketing campaign to get the word out about Credits to Careers. Is that 5 minutes?
Thanks, Susan. That's great. And Credits to Careers is something that we're very excited about and is showing a lot of traffic. And that, of course, as Susan described, is specific to our military-related population here in the Commonwealth. But we do certainly hope that we, or actually not hope, we have plans to expand that. And actually, I'll touch on just a few things before we hand it over to Louisiana. But the workforce development, workforce credentials, employer engagement, those are all priorities for community colleges across the nation. It's certainly priorities here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and increasingly so. We have multiple efforts underway, and it started within recent years, focusing on credentials, credential attainment, stackable credentials, those non-traditional students who were described earlier. And then, of course, CPL is a thread that runs through all of that. So our Complete 2021, you'll see on the slide, was actually part of our system strategic plan launched in 2015 to triple the number of credentials by 2021. Credential using kind of the broadest sense of the term that would include academic credential, registered apprenticeship, industry-validated credentials, workforce training, and the like. Fast Forward was launched a couple of years ago, which actually is a pay-for-performance funding model for non-credit training, traditional non-credit, referred to as non-credit training through our community college systems that are aligned with industry-validated credentials. Again, so think American Welding Society, CompTIA, those types of things. And so when we emphasize those credentials, to tie it back to CPL, we have to make sure that we are creating on-ramps to next steps for continuing education. And so emphasizing those non-credit industry-validated credentials and registered apprenticeships that we want to make sure that those folks that complete those programs have next steps into our academic pathways and stackable pathways. So that, of course, emphasizes the importance of credit for prior learning, such that when someone participates in a registered apprenticeship here within the Commonwealth, maybe with one of our shipbuilding partners down in our Tidewater region, that when they come to one of our community colleges, that we can award credit for prior learning based on the competencies they gained through a non-academic setting. So that is an absolute priority for our system. We did recently invest through our governor, through WIOA set-aside funds, invested about $5.1 million in our system this year in 2019. We're working on that right now. That incorporates a lot of these activities, employer endorsements, non-traditional students, underserved populations, industry credentials, again, pulled throughout, and credit for prior learning. So the credit for prior learning is really the glue that helps hold some of these things together, that shows the intersection between the non-traditional learning and the traditional academic setting. And so it is an absolute priority that we do this properly and that we capture the work that's going on in this space. And that kind of leads us to the last point in what I was referring to when Susan was wrapping up the credits to careers, is we're actively working to capture all this information at a system level and make it publicly accessible to all of our potential students out in the Commonwealth. And so if you take the credits to careers model that Susan briefly described, the intention is to be able to expand that same strategy for industry credentials, such that students that are non-military but that have many of these other experiences that can result in CPL, that they can easily access this information. And so Susan is leading right now within our system to help clean up the data, because data is very important to us from a system level. And we understand with our 23 colleges, there's some inconsistency in data reporting around CPL. And so we're actively working on that right now so that we can clearly establish our baseline and set our targets for there. And so from there, I'll either pass it back to Susan or Meredith.
Any final thoughts, Susan?
No, I'm good. I think Todd hit them all. But I will say that credit for prior learning is a major priority here at the VCCS.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Renee, who will speak about the work being done in Louisiana.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to share the little bit of work that we've done here in the state of Louisiana. Meredith, if you can go to the next slide. I'm not sure where. Okay, there we go. All right, thanks. So I am with the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. We have 12 independently accredited institutions here that work underneath the system. We have some unique advantages where we operate under the same banner instance. We operate under the same Canvas, which is our LMS. So we have a lot of things that we do alike. What we've done over the last couple of years, if we go to the next slide, is introducing CPL in Louisiana as a statewide policy that includes all of the CPL methods that Meredith was mentioning a little bit ago. CLEP, military training, IBCs, and survey certifications. The purpose of this is to eliminate repetition and unnecessary duplication that has already been demonstrated by an individual, and give them credit, college course credit, for what they are bringing to the table. So we have focused our attention mostly on IBCs and a little bit on the military training as well as CLEP, and then there's also portfolios and other methods that the institutions can accept. If we can go to the next slide, and I can tell you all where that policy sits and a little bit more about the policy itself. It's a system-wide policy that was approved last March, so a little bit over a year ago. What we've done is make sure that everyone across the system has a list of courses that can be earned through prior learning, the number of credits that course has, and the minimum standards for getting the CPL applied to their record. Some of the key changes, two pretty big pieces, are a master prior learning assessment matrix that is inclusive of all of the colleges across the state, and it contains over 100 IBCs. And similarly to IBCs, we have quite a few military training courses and entire occupations that are mapped over to course credit. But like I said, we started with our focus on industry-based certifications. The other piece is, and this is a little bit of my thought process, is, we accept a lot of transfer students, and transcripts come in, roughly about 16,000 students each year, and we don't charge them for transcribing those credits, those college credits into credit. So what we've decided to do here is not charge for the CPL evidence being transcribed into credit as long as it's part of that matrix. So we've already evaluated it, we already know what it is, so we decided to eliminate the cost of that for the student. As we talked earlier, there's a time and money are the precursors for not continuing, and this not only attacks the time aspect by reducing the amount of time that students are enrolled, but also helps the financial part as well. So I keep saying this is a statewide deal. We didn't just come across from the system top down. If we can go to the next one real quick. This is our structure. In the background, you'll see a little blurred. That's how we do a lot of things here. We have committees that get together for each various functions. Highlighted up on top, you'll see academic affairs and workforce development. So what we've done is we partnered with our Department of Education, some external folks, business and industry, Workforce Commission, as well as Louisiana National Guard, the reserve units in the state, and we've received all of the IBCs that they train their students towards, or their individuals and employees towards. So we have this massive list of IBCs, and we started mapping them to what courses we have, and that's why we ended up mapping a little bit over 100 of these IBCs, because, for example, if a student is in a high school pathway, they're earning an IBC there, we wanted them to know that they can get college credit. An individual in the military is earning not only their military training, but also the IBCs that come along with that. We wanted them to know that they can get college credit for that. So once we received that list, we got together with faculty and staff from each college, workforce areas and academic areas, and worked together to create what's equivalent. We did that in a couple of ways. We did it inside by each college, and then now we're exploring across colleges. So for instance, if NCCR Level 1 welding IBC is accepted at maybe 6 institutions, and the other 6 also have welding programs, then let's get it all the way across. So we started working within the colleges, and now we're working all the way across to make sure that the same level of credit is given for every IBC across the state. That's how it all kind of came together. It was very easy, of course, to do, get all these folks around the state to collaborate. Everybody, it was very forthcoming and willing to do it. Of course, there's some challenges along the way to get everybody on the same matrix. It took us probably about a year to get to the March policy, and we're still working through the differences between course credits that are being given across, to the point that every year we're reviewing the matrix. So we'll review it again in May, so it's ready for publication along with the catalog. So it's shared with the colleges, share it with the students as part of the catalog, but we help maintain it as a system here. That's a brief version of what our CPL process is and how we were able to get it across. Each of the institutions have their policy, and each of the institutions has their process, and we try to bring that together to a more common process to accelerate the student and making sure that they're completing a little bit faster, as well as not have any unnecessary duplication of what they've already done. Then I think our next steps where we're going from here is to add a little bit more clarity and transparency to it. It's available, but maybe making a better push for the students to know exactly what courses they can get credit for what IBC that brings in. For instance, we're working, I mentioned NCCR a minute ago because we're working with them to do an electronic verification, so that way the student doesn't have to provide the credential. We can verify that electronically, and that removes a step from the student's side. So we have a couple of things that are up next, some of the automation, making it a little bit easier and clearer for students to see what they can earn credit for. Even if they don't know, we might even be telling them, hey, look, we noticed that you came from this MOS in the military, or you came from this company, or this other information. It looks like you might, and then give them the different options through these other agreements and exchanges of data that happen in the background. So that's CPL. I pause every time I say CPL because we do PLA here, so I have to pause for a second and go with CPL instead of saying PLA. So that's CPL in Louisiana, and how we were able to get from everyone doing it individually to having more of a system-wide collaborative effort to providing students an opportunity to earn credits through CPL.
Thanks, Renee. And we'll turn to questions in just a few minutes, so be sure to type any questions or thoughts you have in the chat box. So as you all heard through this webinar, and if you've had a chance to read our report since this morning, CPL has real benefits in supporting post-secondary attainment. It makes it more affordable and more accessible. Creation and implementation of CPL policies often is tasked to the system or institutional level. However, state-level leadership can play a vital role in building support and momentum. So we recommend that states strengthen CPL in two ways: by passing state statute or by incorporating CPL into the state's broader post-secondary agenda. So of course, the strongest action that a state can take is to enact a statute that calls for implementation of CPL in public 2- and 4-year institutions. Statutes can take various forms of specificity depending on the level of institutional autonomy in each state, but the state has a role even in local control constructs. Minimally, every state should have a statewide policy that addresses CPL's quality and consistency, and ideally makes implementation mandatory at public institutions. States that operate in a local control environment can determine what those specifics look like within the parameters of a state statute. Aside from statute, Advance CTE recommends the following 3 ways that a state can support CPL. So first, visible state leaders, such as state CTE directors, governors, state higher education officials, should elevate CPL to be part of the conversation around education and workforce development, especially as the majority of states are creating statewide attainment goals. They have an opportunity to incorporate CPL as part of this broader post-secondary strategy. Second, the state should lead the efforts to publicize what CPL opportunities exist. Unfortunately, even for states and systems and institutions that have really high-quality CPL policies, oftentimes potential learners don't know that these even exist. And then third, the state should facilitate coordination among the state, system, and institutional levels and how CPL policies are developed and implemented. A lack of consistency means that transfer of CPL academic credits is not always guaranteed. It also makes understanding the opportunities for credit that are available confusing. So coordination can mean anything from regular meetings between the relevant individuals at each level to see how practices differ and attempt to find a common policy, to collaboration, from start to finish in developing these practices. So the goal for this is to maximize portability of both prior experiences and accompanying academic credit. So we're going to take some questions now. Again, just type it into the chat box and we'll read your question and answer it. And then I also want to make sure you see we have the contact information for each of the presenters should you wish to follow up afterward. I will go ahead and read out, this is Ashley McFadden from Advance CTE, so I will go ahead and read out some of the questions we've got in the chat. So this first one is for Todd, Susan, and Renee, kind of in all of your experiences, but curious about how Virginia and Louisiana built support for this work among institutional and campus leaders as well as faculty for these policies and programs. I'm wondering if there was any pushback given that some accountability and funding instructions often value enrollment more than completion.
Well, this is Todd from Virginia, and I'll be happy to chime in a bit. The building consensus or alignment between faculty is certainly a priority. That's one of the challenges with CPL, to be quite honest, because although we have 23 colleges within our system, all of our colleges are still, of course, individually accredited through SAC-COC, and through that accreditation, that means, of course, that CPL needs to be approved by individual faculty. And so what that has ended up resulting in is that we all award credit for prior learning. Every college has a policy in place. Every college has a process in place to award credit for prior learning, but the outcomes can be inconsistent. So even though the policy is consistent in that you must do this, the outcomes of the evaluation may vary between institutions, even within our own system, because historically, a lot of our courses, especially in the applied areas, in the technical areas, although their general descriptions would be similar, that they would be catered to very specific industries within the regions, within the state. So that may mean that a faculty member in the western part of our state may evaluate credit for prior learning and result in a different award than faculty that would evaluate that very same experience in our Tidewater region. So that's a challenge when it comes to CPL and when it comes to standardization. So what we are actively trying to do with folks like Susan, with our coordinator, is to have these faculty convenings and facilitate the conversation around assessment and move towards standardization. So it's not something that we can mandate from the top system level, but we can facilitate the discussion and hopefully provide a more standard assessment so students are less surprised in that regard.
Okay, certainly, this is Renee from Louisiana. Yes, I agree with Todd. The outcomes are definitely different, and we definitely facilitate how they come together. We have, for a number of years now, have faculty expertise groups that have been revitalized over the last couple of years. And one of the things that we talk about during all of those meetings, we meet definitely twice a year, different groups of faculty. So you might have the welding faculty, you might have the English faculty, you may have all the different subject matters or areas. For example, tomorrow we have a cloud computing meeting in the afternoon. So we speak with faculty about what's happening across the state, what's happening across nationally, and then they share with each other what they're doing in their respective areas. And some of the topics that we've introduced include CPL and taking IBCs, converting IBCs to college credit. To the question, or the part of the question dealing with enrollment versus completion, we have our Louisiana 2020 that are 6 different goals, but 2 of them deal with that question. One is to double graduates, and the other one is to double the number of students served. So enrollment and graduation. And CPL hits both. So it hits the student getting closer to graduation, as well as moving to that second, third level class, enrolling in that course, and then it leaves an opening in that entry level course for that new student. So you can potentially get 2 students out of CPL processing because you're moving students from the first level course to the second or third, opening seats into those gateway classes that everyone has to take at the front end. So once we explain the different ways of looking at providing credit for prior learning and seeing the advantages and some of the data that was shared at the very beginning, that there's more likelihood to complete and how it hits both categories, our faculty began to collaborate a little bit more on how do we achieve both angles, the enrollment and the completion, as well as giving the students credit for things that they've already mastered. So those are a couple of things that I can think of to your question. It definitely takes a lot of facilitating, a lot of data sharing, and conversations across the different institutions.
Great, thank you. Another question. When we think about IT professional certifications such as A+, Security+, Networks+, are those certifications evaluated on an individual basis, or is it standardized? And that's for all our panelists.
this, Renee, I'll take that one first since Todd did the favor of taking the other one first. We'll take turns. So clearly, once upon a time, things were being done a student one at a time. As a student came with that Network Plus or A Plus certification, and they would get credit. We're moving, and we have moved to where it's standard. Anytime somebody comes with that particular IBC, they will get that same course credit at that college. So the next step that I was talking about earlier is they get the same number of credits at every one of our colleges. It might look a little bit different because they have the faculty that drive that process. But yeah, it's standard. So we know exactly what course A plus means in credit hours and in course and all of that. And also we're working towards making partnerships with those IBC providers to be able to verify that data electronically so the student doesn't have to provide that certificate. Similar to, I keep equating this process to, we have students transferring in, transcripts come in electronically, they get uploaded. We've got to get into IBCs and CPL being done as close to that as possible. So that's kind of the vision and the driving force behind doing CPL here.
Yeah, it sounds like, Renee, you in Louisiana are doing a really good job with the data and the data sharing. That is something that we're definitely working on here in Virginia. I will definitely second the point that it is a standardized assessment such that it's applied to multiple students. So, if, one student comes in with Network Plus, the second student will get the same equivalency. Now, that is primarily at the institutional level at this point, going back between, the difference between system and institution. And how that is recorded and captured right now is varies across institution. Many institutions may have a database housed in the registrar's office that they refer to and the like. And so that is actually part of what Susan and I and the rest of us here in the Commonwealth are working on, is doing a better job of capturing that data, such that we come up with something more like, I think, Renee's matrix that he's referring to, or perhaps in the portal that we were referring to for the credits to careers. So that would be the intent of that outward-facing portal, such that students would have consistent information that is readily accessible. We don't have that up yet for industry-validated credentials. We have it for our military folks. But we're working on using that strategy, maybe similar to Renee's strategy with the matrix, such that students can clearly see if they come in with Network Plus or CompTIA, ABC, they can clearly see how that articulates at each institution within our system.
That's helpful. Thank you. One more question. So are the credits more likely to apply to Gen Ed or the actual CTE / technical coursework? And in general, are you seeing any issues emerging with course sequencing?
Well, since Renee took the last one, it's my turn.
I like that. Teamwork.
So this is Todd, and I'll try to be brief. I will say, I don't think this is anecdotal, that it's primarily in the CTE areas. So when you're looking at your CompTIAs, or say your welding, your NIMS, National Institute of Metalworking Skills, or some of these types of certifications, quite often they'll fall in our occupational areas and they'll be for our applied coursework. So much less often will you see things in our college composition or mathematics. Now we'll certainly see things regarding to AP and dual enrollment and transfer courses and that sort of thing. But when you talk about CPL as non-academic type of activities, primarily that's going to be in our occupational or CTE areas. And then I'll throw it to Louisiana.
Thanks, Todd. I like that. I agree with you. For us, it is more of the programmatic specific courses. So those technical courses that the IBCs and the military credit come to. And the same with Gen Ed, is CLEP, AP courses that usually are the ones that come in for the Gen Ed classes. So we encourage the student to kind of mix and match all of the above. Some IBCs, some CLEPs, some, any other area portfolio work experience to try to get their pathway going. Part of the question I was asking about the sequencing, so that's part of our job as a system office to help facilitate that. So how does this fit into the sequence across institutions, within institutions, and how does it go through, and does a student have to go back? So one of the things that we ask all the time is, okay, if you're giving credit for this third level class, does a student have to take second, first level? Because that's going backwards. So how do we make it and incorporate that the student can get credit for all 3 courses because they're bringing in this one IBC, for instance. And it might be that the IBC plus an exit exam or some other combination of that. So we're starting to looking at that piece of it where, we don't want a student to go backwards. If they're mastered a class that has a prerequisite, they're presenting an IBC for a class that has a prerequisite, then they should get credit for that prerequisite as well. How do we make that happen within accreditation, within faculty guidance, within the constructs of the institution? And that's our role, at least I see our role as system office to facilitate that, to ask the questions that the students might not be asking. Why do I have to go back when I already mastered this? Those kind of things. So we do a pretty good job at keeping the sequence moving forward rather than having to go back and catch a class. But yeah, definitely most of this deals with programmatic courses, which presents the challenge of what if that programmatic course requires a gen ed class. That's when we blend in a CLEP test and we do CLEP boot camps and things of that nature to get the student to get that credit and move forward.
Great, thanks. All right, so we have, I think, one final question. So this one, so transfer credit sometimes is included under that PLA umbrella or CPL, whichever acronym we all want to use, but credits from unfamiliar, non-regionally accredited schools can often be dismissed. And so have you guys, either of you, run into this at either the state or the institution level? So essentially getting any credit transfer problems from non-regional schools.
Sure. This is Renee from Louisiana. We have a unique situation that we have SACS accreditation for some of our institutions, and we also have the Council on Occupational Education for some of our institutions. So even within our system, we have a regional accreditation for some institutions and other institutions having national accreditation. So we deal with that on a daily basis when students are transferring from one institution to the other. We also deal with it when we merge institutions, one that's COE to SACS, and we have to establish the parameters by which we convert classes. So we've got that process worked out, especially from the experience from mergers and the experience from students transferring from a COE institution, national accreditation, to SACS regional accreditation. So we apply the same logic to any other student that comes in from a national accredited institution. Especially, we've had the situation here in Louisiana, we've had a couple of nationally accredited institutions shut down. So how do we work with all of their students to convert that to our regionally accredited course credit? So what we typically do is we create articulation tables and we meet faculty meets to determine what course credit they'll earn. So very similar to what we're doing with CPL, we would treat that the same way. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and this is Todd, and it sounds like you guys are doing great things down there. I will say that we certainly do run into that. Now, all of our institutions are SACS COC accredited. We do not have the dual accreditation like Renee just referred to as COE. Although we certainly have plenty of institutions throughout Virginia that do have the COE or some other national accreditation that we do have to deal with. Now, we can review and award credit. Now, those credits would be treated more like a CPL evaluation. Since they are not regionally accredited, they wouldn't technically be considered a transfer course from another regionally accredited institution because they are viewed slightly differently. But we can still articulate the credit, but we would just have to go through a similar process. I think as Renee was saying, we would still have faculty assess the course, compare learning outcomes to our institution's existing courses, and then make recommendations based on that. So we certainly can do that and deal with that here in Virginia, but it's just basically how it would fall under the policy. So it wouldn't technically, from our perspective, be considered a transfer course if it came from a nationally accredited institution, but it would still be eligible for evaluation under our CPL evaluation guidelines.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks. Well, we're almost out of time. A couple of you have asked about recording for this webinar, so that'll be available on our website, careertech.org, starting tomorrow. If you have any trouble finding it, you can send me an email, mhills@careertech.org. The last thing is you'll see some resources linked here that are related to what we talked about today. The first is the report on CPL that we put out this morning, and then we have some resources on CLAP in CTE, AP in CTE, and then quality in post-secondary CTE. So thank you all for joining, and thank you so much to Kathy, Todd, Susan, and Renee for taking the time to share your work and answer all of our questions, and everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you all very much. Have a good one.